into issues affecting the Black law enforcement community and perspectives that will give us solutions to creating more support for officers who are tackling significant questions about loyalty to law enforcement and loyalty to their community. Black History Month is an important time of the year to celebrate the contributions of Black people throughout our country. And for us especially, their contribution to law enforcement that we are providing a platform to share with you today. We have brought together a panel of law enforcement executives and an invited guest from Verizon, one of our valued corporate partners, to share their experiences and practices to address the important questions being asked here today. Before we begin, I want to thank our generous sponsor, Target, who has been an exceptional supporter of the memorial and the museum from the very beginning. Without their support, today's program would not be possible. Let's take care of some housekeeping items, and they're going to start with, we need your support so that we can continue to host programs like you're going to see today. If you like today's experience, show us by making a donation, and we've made it really easy. Go to lawenforcementmuseum.org, and right there you can make a donation. Or if you're sitting there with your cell phone, you can text programs 2021 programs 2021 to 41444. All attendees, you're muted. If you would like to ask a question, please submit a question through the Q&A tab. Please note that everyone in the webinar will be able to see your question. You can upvote questions submitted by other attendees, and our staff working behind the scenes will prioritize answering the questions that receive the most votes. A link to access the recording of this program on the museum's YouTube channel will be sent to everyone in a few days. We are also committed to providing greater accessibility to our programs and are providing closed captioning today. You can turn on the closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. And panelists, remember to keep yourself on mute when you are not talking. So let's begin. President Linda Williams, welcome. Welcome to our program today, and thank you so much for being here. President Williams is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and she's currently the professor of the practice at Middle Tennessee State University in the Department of Criminal Justice Administration. In her role there, Ms. Williams' curriculum includes foreign domestic terrorism studies, criminal justice processes, community and public service engagement, and executive law enforcement leadership speaker symposiums. Prior to joining the faculty of MTSU, Ms. Williams led an accomplished career as a veteran of the United States Secret Service from 1988 until she retired as Deputy Assistant Director in 2017. As president of Noble, Ms. Williams is focused on achieving the organization's goals through a three-pillar platform on police reform, gun violence, and voter engagement. President Williams, welcome.
Well, Marsha, thank you very much. And thank you for partnering with Noble during this very moment in our country as we celebrate Black History Month. And thank you for co-hosting today's discussion. Noble is proud to stand with the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum as we navigate through the chronicles of the criminal justice system. As we watch the outpour of citizens exercising their First Amendment rights, the stench of systemic racism, and an enduring global pandemic, Noble continues to stand as the beacon of light in these unprecedented times. There has been no urgency more than the present to engage in these needed conversations. Noble's mission is to ensure equity in the administration of justice and the provision of public service to all communities, and to serve as the conscience of law enforcement by being committed to justice by action. Currently, Noble is engaged to uncover ways to support Black law enforcement officers, encourage new candidates, and to join a law enforcement agency to become guardians of their communities. This provocative panel will examine the potential adverse reactions facing Black police officers and pathways to changing the culture inside of agencies that could affect a more positive of the law enforcement profession. The challenge in law enforcement today is hugely more complex. These challenges will be discussed in depth as we delve into strategies, technology, demand, and resources to improve transparency and accountability. To accomplish such, the challenges of policing are real. They require a rethinking of policy, training, management, and police operating practices. Today's complexities require a holistic approach in reimagining public safety. To our special guests, to Sheriff Marion Brown, Chief Ernest Findley, Chief Jeffrey Glover, Sheriff Melanie Maddox, and Shamari Williams from Verizon, I thank each of you for your unwavering commitment to law enforcement. And to Dr. Lorenzo Boyd, thank you for moderating this panel as only you can. So on behalf of more than 3,800 members of Noble, we thank you for your continued support. My hope is that this forum will enlighten, inform, and challenge you. Thank you.
Thank you to President Williams, and thank you so much for being here with us today. And it's great to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Lorenzo Boyd. Dr. Boyd is Vice President for Diversity Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of New Haven. He is a nationally recognized expert in police community relations and an authority on urban policing. He is the former director of the Center of Advanced Policing at the University of New Haven, and his 14-year service as deputy sheriff in Boston, Massachusetts, informs his 20-year career in higher education. He brings research and theory into practice, making him a sought-after consultant, trainer, and speaker for departments and communities across the country. And that's right, we have him here with us today. He works with police leaders around the country to determine training needs and develops interactive professional development sessions that include real-life scenarios and role play. Dr. Boyd conducts professional development training with a central focus on building levels of empathy, lived experiences, and culture competence among police personnel. Dr. Boyd, welcome.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you for the National Law Enforcement Museum, and thank you to Noble. But more importantly, thank you to the panelists that are here to share their knowledge, and thank you for everyone that tuned in virtually through Facebook or other platforms. Let me first start off by saying that this panel is not like other panels that you've seen. Typically, we see panels that will have police chiefs from a particular area or that will have sheriffs, but it's extremely rare that we'll have sitting sheriffs, sitting police chiefs, and have business partners together in the same room talking about the same issue. Today, we're talking about support for Black police officers, Black law enforcement. So without further ado, let me start off by introducing you to the panel that we have with us today. First of all, from DeKalb County, Georgia, we have Sheriff Melanie Maddox. Sheriff Maddox is the 50th sheriff of DeKalb County and makes history being the first woman to hold the office. As a 28-year law enforcement veteran, Sheriff Maddox began her career with the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office, going on to serve both the city of Atlanta and the DeKalb County Police Department. In 2008, she created the Public Safety Office for the DeKalb Technical College, now Georgia Piedmont Technical College, first serving as Assistant Chief of Police and subsequently becoming the college's first female Chief of Police. She left in 2013 to pursue election as the DeKalb County Sheriff in 2014. In early 2019, Sheriff Maddox returned to DeKalb County Sheriff's Office as the Chief of Administration. On July 1st of 2019, she was appointed as Deputy Chief, the highest ranking non-elected position in the agency. She was responsible for the planning and administration of the jail, the court, as well as field and training operations. Sheriff Maddox is post-certified and is certified as a defensive tactics instructor and received a certificate in hostage negotiation. Sheriff Maddox is the recipient of numerous community awards and has been recognized for her exemplary community service on the Trinity Broadcasting Network and the Ivy Leaf, the official magazine of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She's been on local television and radio outlets, as well as being on the cover of numerous magazines and newspapers. In 2019, Women Looking Ahead magazine named her one of Georgia's most powerful and influential law enforcement officers. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Sheriff Melody Maddox. Next, we have Sheriff Marion Brown from Dallas County, Texas. Sheriff Brown began her law enforcement career in 1988 with the Duncanville, Texas Police Department, and she was quite the pioneer, being the first African-American female police officer there. She rose quickly through the ranks. Her experience includes serving as the first line supervisor, formulating and supervising the community-oriented policing unit, and positions including crime prevention and community relations, patrol watch commander, criminal investigations commander, and assistant chief of police. Sheriff Brown holds a Master Peace Officer certification from the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. She is a graduate of the International Law Enforcement Institute's Command College, as well as the FBI National Academy Associates Command College, and she received training in the special investigation topics, crime prevention, hostage negotiation, and she holds an instructor certificate. Sheriff Brown takes pride in using her expertise to educate the community and promote partnerships that foster genuine and positive relationships between the police and the communities they serve. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheriff Marion Brown. Next, we have Chief Ernest Findley of Montgomery, Alabama Police Department. Chief Findley Jr. knew as a child that policing would be his life's work. He joined the Atlanta Police Department in 1986 after serving in the U.S. Army and completed his college career at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. His years with the Atlanta Police Department introduced him to neighborhood policing, narcotics, sex crimes, the Red Dog Drug Unit, and community policing. He moved up in the ranks at Atlanta Police. He was promoted to sergeant in 1993, lieutenant in 1998, major 2003, and became deputy chief in 2010. As deputy police chief, he served as the Field Operations Division commander and directed the largest division of the police department. In 2013, he commanded the Community Service Division in preparing and implementing short-term and long-term strategies for 4 sections of Atlanta PD's overall responsibility. Chief Findley was appointed the 13th Chief of Police in Montgomery on December 14th, 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief Ernest Findley. And next we have from Tempe, Arizona, Chief Jeffrey Glover. Interim Chief Jeffrey Glover began his career with the Tempe Police Department in October of 1999. He has over 20 years of law enforcement experience. He has steadily worked his way through the ranks, serving the department in a variety of capacities. He worked as a field training officer, providing recruits with mentorship and insight into the department. He was a narcotics detective, crime prevention detective, media relations sergeant, patrol lieutenant, detention manager, acting commander, and acting commander over 21st Century Policing. He also served the department as commander over the Criminal and Special Investigations Division to include homicide, narcotics, and SWAT. prior to his retirement from the department in February of 2020. But in October of 2020, he returned to the Tempe Police Department as the interim chief of police. From his rich work experience, Chief Glover has provided diversity training and firsthand knowledge of the African American perspective on community policing. He has emphasized promoting community involvement and education and provides instruction on various topics, including leadership, ethics and professionalism, team dynamics, fair and impartial policing, cultural awareness, and diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief Jeffrey Glover. And finally, we're really happy to have our private partnership with Verizon. We have Mr. Shamari Williams, a managing partner of Verizon. Mr. Williams is highly skilled. He's a highly skilled visionary leader with over 20 years of experience as a coalition builder within the public sector and the private sector. He's been known for his exceptional team building and development, contract negotiations, wireless and wireline cross-team collaboration, customer service and retention, project management, and community relations. Ladies and gentlemen, from Verizon, Mr. Shamari Williams. Now, thank you, folks, for joining us. As I mentioned, we're going to do this round robin style. We have a series of questions that we're going to ask, and as we ask the question, we're going to have one person as a primary person to take the lead on that question, but then we'll also open it up to everyone so that everyone on the panel will get to be the primary person responding to a question. And we're going to start with Sheriff Maddox, because she has another engagement, so she's going to be leaving us a little bit early. So if we will, Sheriff Maddox, the first question is for you. Based on your ample experience, how much do you think communities of color support Black law enforcement, and does that support change based on major incidents?
Thank you for that question. First of all, let me say thank you to President Williams, also to Noble and the National Law Enforcement Memorial for this candid conversation, and also thank you to you for moderating this. But to answer the question is, I think for the most part that communities of colors want to be a part of law enforcement. And unfortunately is that, you know, as Blacks in the community, there's a level of distrust there. And it comes from all the incidents that you see that have taken place over the past couple of months or even years. But understand one thing, this is not something that has just started. This has been going on for years. It's just now with all the cameras and the media and everything out there, now we get to see more of it. So we look at that, and what we have to do is, what can we do? What can we do, especially being an African-American female in law enforcement and one of the top law enforcement officers in the county, or more so in the state? We have to get more involved. We as the leaders have to get out in the community and change that dynamics and the outlook for law enforcement. And it's making it a little harder for us to do that because of all the past. But I think when we go out there in the community and we as the leaders show who we are and that they can trust us, then the community is going to say, well, if I can trust the sheriff and the chief, then I know I can trust the people that they have working for them, because we're going to groom our people with the same ideas and thoughts that we have to be the leader that we want them to be in the community. But to answer the questions, yes, we want to be a part of it. And I've had individuals to call me, and I've had inmates to secretly give me information because they want to assist, but they don't trust law enforcement, regardless of whether they're Black or white. They just don't trust individuals anymore that wears this badge, and that has been taken away from us. And we've got to work together, and all of us on this panel, it's an honor to be on here so that we can work together to gain that trust, because what affects one community is definitely going to affect another community, regardless of what state or city that you live in.
Excellent answer. Thank you for that. Chief Glover?
Yes, thank you. And I really appreciate this. Is an honor to be on this panel, to be with such distinguished individuals on this panel. It's just amazing. And I'll start off by saying that, in my experience, I mean, it's definitely something that our community members are very supportive of Blacks in law enforcement. And there's definitely a need for us to be a part of this profession. We, as Sheriff Maddox had explained, from a historical perspective, we see some of the different issues that have come up over the years where in history, you go back to major incidents that have occurred, and that has an impact on how we are viewed, together, in terms of, that trust dynamic. And so we have to work extremely hard to continue to try and build those relationships back up, because we are not going to get the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes even as Black police officers, we're going to be even more critical of our own people, because there's that greater expectation on us to say that, hey, are they in there doing the right thing? Are you setting that example? Are you leading by example and setting the tone for that behavior? And so it's important for us to make sure that, we are trying to keep that community engagement and ensuring that, that we are being seen and we're visible out there. And we're creating those relationships and those strong connections within the community. It can't really emphasize that more, because right now, especially as things have waned in terms of support for law enforcement, people are hungry for change and they're hungry for reform. And so we have to be a part of that, and we have to drive that narrative.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Sheriff Brown, what's your thought on it? Can you talk about the amount of support that you see for Black law enforcement?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. I think that as a whole, African-American people want to see African-American people policing their communities. I think that sometimes that position can waver based on an incident, as you asked. I think it can waver, but I think that as a whole, we want to see folks who look like us. And the reason being is that we tend to understand those little intricacies, if you will, about our group. And so we're not so prone to be nervous about encounters with people who look like us. And so I think that not only do we want representation, but it is absolutely necessary that we have appropriate representation within law enforcement.
Excellent, excellent. Mr. Williams, your perspective as a corporate sponsor, first of all, thank you and thank Verizon, but your perspective is a little different being outside of uniform. So can you talk to me about what you think you see as far as support for Black law enforcement?
Absolutely. First, let me just start by thanking President Williams and to the Noble organization for inviting me. This is a very distinguished panel, and I am deeply appreciative to be part of this. And I will just say, let me also just start by saying, Martin Luther King stated, the time is always right to do what is right. And I think this is a perfect time to really tackle this issue. So many things going on in our community. I'll tell you that Verizon's position and how we support law enforcement, particularly the Noble organization, is so important. Public-private partnerships are critical to enhancing and delivering the kind of community, the ability to drive trust, the ability to protect our community is super important. And that is the delivery of information and the many tools and resources that we deliver to law enforcement across the nation, both in federal and state and local, to help support that all-important mission. And I'll just say that the Verizon has a public safety outreach program we invested in well over 12 years ago. And that started, in addition to that, we also started over 11 years ago in supporting the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial Fund and Museum, obviously the host here today. And we just believe it's so very important and vital to this community at large, to make sure that public-private partnerships are front and center to how we support the community. And so, for example, I'll also speak on the Fallen Officer Fund. This is one of those unfortunate ones, but it is so important because when an officer is killed in the line of duty, Verizon gives the beneficiary of the officer a donation. These funds are usually delivered to the family within 72 hours of the unfortunate and tragic deaths of an officer. Over 2.2 million has been donated to date. So we believe that this is really, really important to be there in support, not only in times of tragedy, but particularly in times of, when the sun is shining, right? Every day we need to be there front and center and doing our part to help deliver a safer community. And we are very, very honored to do that here today.
Excellent. Great reason to support Verizon. So thank you for that. And thank Verizon for all that you're doing. Chief Findley, I'm going to bring you into this question. The question is, based on your experience, how much do you think communities of color support Black law enforcement? And how does that support change based on major incidents?
Well, I think that they do. And the thing that as Black police officers, we got to stay in the mix. And so it's not a one and done. We got to constantly be in those communities. We got to constantly be in those churches, in those schools, good times and bad times. Good times and bad times. We got to show that we are professional and that we care. And we show that we care by being in those communities and really being a part of those communities. And so the issue that we do have is that when we have that us against them attitude, and we got to break that sense of us against them in those silos and really get engaged. And the thing that it resonates with me, being in Montgomery, that a lot of my officers are from Montgomery and they're from these neighborhoods. And when we have those crisis situations in those neighborhoods, we got relatives, we got families, we got friends, and that really helps out. And so you got to have skin in the game. You got to be committed to want to be around people that support and love you. About the mere fact that this is a predominantly Black community, Black city, that love goes a long ways when you provide that service, that professional service to them.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So the next question, I'm going to start off with Chief Glover. A lot of people talk about representation. A lot of people say that if we had more Black officers in Black communities, the problems would go away. So that's the backdrop of the question. In your opinion, do you think communities of color actually want more Black officers? Do they see that increased representation as the solution for crime fighting and better support of neighborhoods? And ultimately, should that be the goal of law enforcement?
Well, yes. I mean, to simply put the question, yes, I do believe that we have to have more representation in that. I believe that within my community, within the Tempe community, I mean, we're a very diverse community. We have 195,000 people. We have one of the largest campus atmospheres with Arizona State University in the nation, right in the center of the city. So we have a very diverse city. And I think that we, in terms of the way that we approach this is from the hiring recruitment standpoint is that, we're trying to come to that place where we can mirror, what our community's members, our community members look like. And so we really are trying to be intentional in that. I think that there's a certain comfort level in terms of having more officers of color within the organization and, because of the community that we're supporting. And I believe that the community wants and has that expectation that we are going to bring in more officers of color into our agency. Now, this doesn't always translate into the feeling of safety and security for all of our community members in that aspect, that it also depends on what the culture is of your agency and how that's being led and what's being driven. And so, we're trying to create an environment that is very inclusive in Tempe and ensuring that everybody is respected and that procedural justice is at the forefront of everything that we do. I do feel that, our goal, our goal in law enforcement should be that, this basic principles of just, creating those strong relationships and community building should be always at the forefront of anything that we're doing. And because we don't want to be the come in and be an occupying force, we want to be able to represent the community that we serve and be good public servants.
We don't ever want to just use the term Black community as a monolithic group, implying that all 45 million Black people in this country have the same identity. But with that in mind, Sheriff Brown, what do you think? Do you think communities of color want more Black officers?
Well, and as I was saying earlier, I think that they do. I think it's important for us to build trust first and foremost. If we don't have trust, then it's very difficult for us to police our communities. And so if we have people who, as the chief has already said, if we come from the community, if we have investment in that community, then we're more apt to trust one another. And not only are we more apt to trust one another, but we can actually go into the communities and we can visit with those communities and not feel like those communities are thinking that we're unable to do what we need to do to police their communities. So I think it's important. I think it should be intentional that we are hiring people of color. I think that we should be intentional in our recruiting efforts. And I think that we should be inclusive in law enforcement. We need to make sure that the people that we are policing, that they are reflective, we are reflective of what that community looks like. I think it's extremely important.
Sheriff Maddox, we acknowledge that these cities aren't all the same. Montgomery is not like DeKalb, which is not like Dallas. So what do you think? Do people of color want more Black cops?
Well, let me say this, and I've heard that before from being out in the community, of course, safely, considering that it's COVID still. But I've heard that several times. They want people to respond to calls that look like them. Unfortunately, in an ideal world, that would be also great, I guess. But unfortunately, you know, for law enforcement, who wants to do our job? Nobody wants to do our job. So right now we're all of us from all over the world are basically pulling from the same pool. But for me, let me just say this: in DeKalb County, we have about approximately 750,000 plus citizens. 2/3 of that are Black. Now, where am I going to get the officers to fill all of 2/3 of that? But it goes back to, as all the panelists have said, let's get out in the community. It's about trust. It's about training. You have to train these individuals how to think, how to act, how to respond. That's where that cultural diversity comes in. The crisis intervention training comes in. And it also looks at the leader. Again, when they see us out there being involved in the community, it goes back to the level of trust. And when we're talking about recruiting, going back to what I'm doing now, I've dropped my age. Instead of being 20 to come in as a detention officer, I have now dropped the age down to 20. So we are looking at find a solution to the problem. The solution is to go out there and bring them and show them what we do so that they can understand, groom them, train them, make them a part, give them a career. We do mentor. As soon as you walk in the door, to come in to work here, you are assigned a mentor. So we're putting you on a career track. Here's the thing with the sheriff's office. So when you leave from here, should you decide that you want to go out and become a police officer with the police department from any municipality here in the state of Georgia, now they have gained an outstanding officer, because that officer has been taught how to talk to people, how to treat people, because it's so diverse. This jail has no discrimination on it whatsoever, and crime does not as well.
So just to be clear, you dropped your detention age from 21 to 20?
No, 18 years old.
From 20 to 18.
To combat that pipeline to prison. So even if you have 30 to 60 days prior to your birthday, if you're 17 and you're in high school, you can go ahead and apply for the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. Upon your completion, once you graduate with your high school diploma or GED, you automatically walking into the door, making $37,000 a year. What we're doing, we're taking them off the streets, because if you don't get them in between that time, remember, they can't carry a gun until they're 21. So if you get that time, if you don't get them from that 17 from high school in between that time, that's what the problem is going to be, because what else are they going to do? And then we have to look at those individual records. You know, at what time are we going to say it's okay, that was a mistake that took place 15, 20 years ago?
Chief Findley, you've been in most of your career in Atlanta, and now you're in Montgomery, two very different communities. So what do you think? Is that what communities of color want? And should that be the goal of law enforcement moving forward?
No, and I don't think so. And I think that Sheriff Maddox was spot on. That would piss me off, So I think that if I go to a call and it's a white resident and they want a white officer, that would piss me off. So my thing is, it's a training issue, right? So we train our officers the same correct way. So black, white, Hispanic, doesn't matter. It's that training. So as long as we do the guidelines by our post standards and train officers professionally, I think that we're fine. I think that it's all about that engagement. It's all about building that trust and handling that call as professional as possible. So I stay away from categories like that. I think it's important that we as supervisors and as leaders monitor the way that we handle calls and the way we treat citizens to make sure that every citizen is treated with the utmost respect and that we have that follow-up with customer service.
Dr. Boyd, if I could just add something, because I think there's so many points that are being made. Technology is a major bridge to really driving meaningful relationships with the community. Many of our youth are used to, by the time they're like 8 or 9, they know how to use these things pretty well, right? So what's the way to connect? The way we connect is through technology in some ways, right? And there, of course, there's also just the plain old kinetic entry point to really driving a meaningful relationships and trust, building that trust, particularly with our youth. And I think that is essential in the recruitment efforts. But we also understand that we need to help be part of what do kids have to do? What are they learning? How are we contributing to their education, right? To build those pipelines and paths, to create paths for them for careers within Verizon, very lucrative careers within Verizon. So very similar to what's been described, we have a major presence around HBCUs and how we recruit, but also when we think about how we drive safety for our officers, Destination Zero. Officers need to know that there's technology out there that will help them, provide them with situational awareness, so that obviously it could be in a very dangerous situation, and that technology really helps to not only to drive safety, but also provide those meaningful bridges to the community.
Absolutely. The technology is a major emphasis as we move forward, and technology is actually what's changing policing moving forward. So thank you for that.
Dr. Boyd.
Yes, please.
Excuse me, it's Sheriff Brown. I want to say something in response to your last question. I don't want to leave the impression that I think that the African-American community only wants African-American officers to respond to their needs for police service. That is not what the question was. The question was, do I think that African-American people want to see more representation? And yes, I do think that we want and we need and we absolutely should have more representation, but that's not to articulate that only African-American officers should be responding to African-American calls for service. I wanted to clarify that because I think there was a little disconnect somewhere in there, and I didn't want to leave that impression. So thank you.
Excellent. That's a good point. And we absolutely were saying we're looking for representation, not that Black officers are better than white officers. That's not where we were going at all. We were just asking about representation. So thank you for that clarity. So as much as we're talking about Black law enforcement, we're also talking about communities of color. And a lot of times when we talk about the BIPOC community, there has historically been a disconnect between policing and communities of color, particularly with major incidents like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean. I can go on for an hour. And after each of these incidents, there's some sort of post-incident action that happens. The one thing we can say is right after the George Floyd murder, there was a lot of work with the community and the police, a lot of officers deciding we need to do things differently. So here's my question for you, Chief Findley. Which after incident action do you think is the most effective way to bridge the gap between the police and communities of color? And do you think that the community responds well to these after incident actions?
And that's a good question. And And I would say, and I think the way you started off, Dr. Boyd, is with the Tamir Rice, Gardner, Baton Rouge situation. And we can go on and on with these different incidents that happened within the last 10 or 15 years. It seems like we're kicking the can down the road, right? And so after these major incidents, we get together, we have these conversations, and it looks like things are going the right way. Then we go to court, what happens? And so again, when I think about the George Floyd in Minneapolis, I felt the same way, right? But I think what happened this time, people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that this with the revision and with the movement, with all these protests, it makes you think you got to change. And so part of that change, and the reality is that the majority of these law enforcement agencies throughout this country still have those policies in place about the choking, about the restraint. They still have it. And so I think a conscientious department and jurisdiction will make some of those strategic changes when you have to reform those policies as to deal with restraints, to deal with the choking and make that happen. So that's a reality of Black law enforcement executive to make those changes. Brianna tell the same thing, and so when we look at those rogue cops, and we're going to call it like it is, those 3 officers on a no-knock warrant, that's rogueness. That's crazy. So the policy and procedure, if you stick by that in the constitutional search and seizure, you should do fine. And so again, there's still agencies to this day is afraid to raise their hand and say, I'm going to do away with no knock. And that's what you got to do, because what's more important, a body or property? A body is. And so you put yourself in that situation that you're going to kill somebody. And especially if it's not approved up the chain of command. And again, we got to constantly revise these policies and that temperature check. And so those major incidents or those temperature checks, and make sure that your policy and your department is on line with the best practices that you can possibly do.
Excellent. Thank you. Sheriff Maddox, just before you leave, can I get you to chime in on that? I know you have to go. After incident actions, which ones do you think work well?
Well, first of all, let me just say this. There shouldn't have been any after incident actions, because there shouldn't have happened from the beginning, from the first place. We should have already had actions in place. It's about, again, going back, training your officers how to treat people, how to talk to people, how to respond to people, regardless of their color. It's about being fair. It's about not being afraid. It's about doing your job and doing it with the expectancy of excellence, accountability, and respect, as we have done here at the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. However, the after plan, as some people say, go out and be involved in the community. I've been doing that. And that's not to toot my own horn or anything, because I saw this, because I had the opportunity to talk to those individuals in the community. Sometimes you have to listen to what people are saying and bring it back. That's why a lot of times we can't just sit here in this seat and give that glamorous life. We actually, as the leaders, have to go out and mix and mingle. We have to dance. We have to stroll, whatever it takes in order to hear what they're saying and bring it back. So an after plan is what it is. Did I have to come in and change my policy? Yes, I did, because again, I had been here a year. By the time I got sworn in, pandemic hit, I had to go into action on making sure that my inmates were safe. And number one, that my employees were safe, because if the employees are safe, I know they're going to make sure that the inmates are taken care of. So the after action plan, before action plan, I believe in just planning. I'm very proactive, and rather being reactive, I don't believe in that. I'm already planning as we speak. As I sit here, that's why I'm getting ready to get off of this one to go on another one, because I'm planning for tomorrow, the what if. I tell my whole team, don't just sit there and say, well, we don't know. No, what if? It's not that if, because it is. So let's go ahead and be prepared. Same way with the COVID, the pandemic. It wasn't if we're going to get an inmate with COVID. It was a matter of when we're going to get the inmate with COVID. And when we got the one, we knew there was going to be 2, 3, and 4, and we had to jump on it. So
thank you very much, Sheriff Melody Maddox.
Thank you so much. And I have to jump off and get on my oven. They're already bugging me.
Thank you for joining us. Chief Glover, you were in the middle of this. You were retired. You were a civilian and came back into policing to run a major department after this. What are your thoughts on the after incident actions and whether or not they're effective in bridging the gap between the police and communities of color?
Yes, I jumped in face first, right back into the fire in the midst of all of this. And, the George Floyd incident just sickened me to see that, and anytime you have an incident like that happens in one part of the United States, we're all affected. It doesn't matter if it's in New York, it's going to affect Arizona, it's going to affect, Minnesota, Florida, it doesn't matter. So, in these things, it sort of led me to actually come back into law enforcement and help with our community, the community that I grew up in terms of, my adult life working within the Tempe Police Department. And so, really, one of the things that I always stressed, even, coming up in the department is that, we are customer service agents. This is our job is customer service. Being a public servant means that, you don't get to just be badge heavy and just do whatever it is that you want to do. We have rules in place, and this job is about being able to serve your community, and that is first and foremost what you're supposed to do. And in terms of what Chief Findley had mentioned in regards to policy, one of the first things that we started looking at, and it was going back and revising policies. There was things that we were already doing in terms of de-escalation and revamping our training as it related to de-escalation. We partnered with Arizona State University to create a program that is tailor-made specifically for our department and for our community. We also joined the 8 Can't Wait program. We went through and we banned the use of chokeholds. We made some of the different policy changes that they had recommended that we implement, and they were pleased that in a lot of cases of the policies, of the 8 policies, key policies that they looked at for us, was that we had already been following that model for most of our policies. I believe it was 6 of them. We just needed to clarify a few things to get to the 8. And we're proud to be a part of that campaign, because the times are changing, and we have to catch up to what's going on socially, what's going on in the United States and within our communities. And sometimes law enforcement, we're 2 steps behind. So we're just trying to catch up.
Excellent. Sheriff Brown, your thoughts. After incident actions, do they work? Are they effective?
Well, Doctor, I think that they can work. Our agency, just like everybody else, we began to look at our policies and review those policies and see what we needed to do to update those policies or create policies. I'm proud to say that basically what we needed to do was to just kind of tweak some of the policies that we already had in place. And while we might not have been calling them, for instance, the duty to intervene, we might not have been calling it that. We had a policy already that said it is your responsibility to intervene. And so we reviewed our policies, but it's not something that you just do and it's done. It's something that you have to do regularly. You have to continue to do it. You have to look at the environment around you. You have to renew your training policies and renew your training. You have to update your training, and you have to get out in the community. As Sheriff Maddox said, you have to get out there and you have to have those non-enforcement interactions in the community. Those are extremely important. That is the way that people get to know you and you get to know the people. And so they can be effective, those after action things that we do, but it's not like we do it and then we're just through with it. It has to be redone every day, all over, constant reviewing of it, constant renewing of it. And it's just like Chief Glover said, this is customer service business is what we're in. We've gotten it a little confused. And somewhere along the way, we decided that perhaps because we think the people have no choice of who's going to police them or they have to call us as the police. It's not true. We still have to be engaged in customer service. This is what we do. This is what should be expected of the community when they call for police. We work for them. You know, you work the streets and you hate to hear that person say, well, I pay your salary. Well, most certainly you do pay my salary, but besides you paying my salary, I should remember that you are a customer and I am a customer service representative. So I think that they can work. I think they have to be demonstrated by the head. And again, it's not just a one and done. It's something that becomes a philosophy. It's not just some cliche phrase that you come up with. It has to be a philosophy and one that is demonstrated regularly so that people know that you can be trusted. You know, I have a special circumstance. I, like Sheriff Maddox, have inmates who rely on me. I want my inmates to rely on me. I want them to be able to trust me too, so that if there is something going on that maybe we don't know about, I want somebody to tell me about it. And so I have to walk amongst them and talk with them. I want them to know that we are here for customer service. This is what we do. This is what we're about.
Customer service, that's an excellent transition to where I wanted to go next, because a lot of times when we talk about community policing, the onus is on the police. We should be talking about community engagement is where we should be going. But when we talk about customer service, Mr. Williams, let me push this back to you a little bit, because the onus is not just the police. What can private sector businesses like Verizon or our sponsors Target, what can they do to create opportunities to bring law enforcement and communities of color together to move the agenda forward?
That's a very, very good question. I think we need to support efforts to meet the community where they are, right? So I would invite, especially as we go into the Q&A session, there are a lot of you out there. If you wouldn't mind, share what would you like to see from a public-private partnership? We don't always like to profess that we know or have the answers, much in the way that has been described here about serving the community. We also recognize the ability and the awesome responsibility of the community in the way we can, right? So we need to be good ears and stewards of ways that we can help promote trust building, relationship building. I mean, that's what we do. That's what we do on a day in, day out basis. And I think that is really the crux of how we can really execute. So understanding what are those ideas, what are those things that you'd like to see more of from the community. Verizon is there. We've got the ear. We've got we have a lot of former law enforcement folks within our organization. We just recently had the Honorable Mike Mason retired from Verizon. Many of you may know who Mike Mason is. He was formerly the head of operations, assistant director of operations for the FBI for many, many years. He was our chief security officer for quite some time. And so I've learned a great deal from him and understanding ways that we can meet the community where they are. And he regularly really counseled us on ways that we can be better partners. So I believe there's always a higher gear that we can shift to. And I invite those ideas here today.
Excellent, excellent. Building that relationship, also the public-private sector, is really, really important. And we often look at the police as a monolithic group. We understand that the vast majority of policing in this country are white and male, but a significant number of people that they deal with are not. So Sheriff Brown, my question to you is, what's the impact of cultural competence training on preventing crime and building trust? Instead of being reactive, because we acknowledge upwards of 90% of policing is reactive, what's the impact on cultural competence in preventing crime and building trust with the community?
Okay, Doctor, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, talking about getting to learn and appreciate the little intricacies that are germane to specific groups. I think that we have to remember that people fear the unknown. And when you have a situation where one officer is not familiar with the culture of the caller for police service, then sometimes there could be a mixture of fear in there somewhere, and that could cause a mistake. It can dictate some bad decisions. And so I think it's important for us to train our officers in the beginning. And here in Dallas, Texas, what we've done is I have challenged my training staff to add what I'm calling, I told them it's going to be a heavy day. And essentially what I've asked them to do is I want them to take those same videos that we watched over and over and over that made us feel what people were feeling when we saw people with officers and their knees on their necks and officers shooting people unjustifiably. I want us to re-watch those and relive those. And I want the people who are being trained to be deputies for this department, I want them to have discussions about it. I want them to feel what it is that we felt when we first learned of it. And I want our folks to have a community member come in and talk about what it is that they are seeing on these videos. I want them to talk about these current events that have happened, and I don't want them to be forgotten. And so in an effort for them not to be forgotten, I want them to relive them through the video training over and over again so that the cadets get an understanding of why people feel the way that they feel. And if you bring in a community member who says, okay, and in this situation, here's why we felt this way, I think that it adds a whole lot to the cultural competency training to our deputies. So I think that's a huge piece right there. Again, if we have a better understanding of cultures, then we're less likely to fear them, and our decisions are less driven by fear, which means better decisions.
Thank you. Here's the last question, and we've got ample questions from the audience, but I just want to throw this question out to whoever is willing to answer it. What are some of the examples of police departments getting it right? You know, what is going on right that we can emulate, and what strategies have you done in your agency that you're most proud of that other people can learn from? Chief Findley, you want to start?
I wanted to piggyback off of Sheriff Brown, but anyway, I think that one of the things that I'm good at and been good at for about 20 years is to get out in the community and just really get down. And so one of the things that I kind of stole from Atlanta is part walk and talk. We do it on a regular, and that means that we're going to give love to a community for an hour or two, and just really love on that community, just to get information, receive information, and this fellowship it's not a one and done. It's one of those things that we got to constantly do it. But the other thing that we are working for perfection is that training competency when we're talking about developing a program to deal with the past that we did in Montgomery with the African Americans. So we have a program that we're working closely with EJI and the Southern Poverty Law Center to talk about those wrongs from a civilian point of view, that these young officers that really haven't been around diversity or Black people, white people, or the opposite, that they can hear of the past sins of their forefathers. And that really resonates with us when we talk about policing in a historic city like ours, to talk about those wrongs. So that's something that we are really pushing with our partnerships, again, with EJI and SPLC.
Chief Glover, what are we getting right?
Just to piggyback off of Chief Findley, I mean, when it comes to cultural competency, I mean, it's very hard to hate up close. I mean, when you are really getting engaged and you are making your staff, making your people, making the training uncomfortable, it is very hard to hate up close. And you expose them. You have to get them exposed, to that environment, and you have to make them uncomfortable in order to get them to actually see the bigger picture. And I commend Chief Findley on what he's doing out there, because that's something that we're looking at doing here in Tempe is to provide that historical perspective. That's a rare opportunity, and it's been a missed opportunity in law enforcement to not really engage on something that we know to be true. It was that, people and communities of color have not been treated fairly in this country. And so, why hide that fact? We have to be open. We have to talk about that. Something that we've recently done that I'm most proud of in Tempe is we recently finished up our mayor's public safety task force. which again, it was conversations that were extremely uncomfortable because we had everybody from Black Lives Matter to Lucha to all of the different activist groups that we engaged with conversation and let them just sort of, we peeled back the scabs and all the scar tissue and let it all hang out. And they really gave it to us, but we got a lot of great information out of it in terms of recommendations that we'll be able to utilize and implement within the department's strategic plan in the future. So, you know, these are things that you have to do. Sometimes you have to, you know, tear down some of those walls and bring people in that you normally would not speak to in order to actually move the dial forward.
Mr. Williams, what do you think the police are getting right?
Well, I believe I see a more intentional effort to really build the bridge in the community. You know, I will say that recently during this pandemic, we had to really step up and help, you know, the police community really police in a different way, right? I mean, they're trying to stay safe. All of you are human beings, right? We're all trying to stay safe in this pandemic, right? We need to protect our families as well. So, you know, just being out there to assist when needed, answering the call at 8 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday, whatever it takes. You know, just being there and standing side by side with our law enforcement, you know, community is super important. We know that it will obviously materialize in a positive way out in the community at large. So, you know, just being there, being responsive, and you know, just willing to listen and execute and make the right calls.
Sheriff Brown, you get the last word on this question before we go to the audience. What are we getting right? What can we emulate?
Well, I think that the things that we are getting right is what I just talked about, and that is for us to not forget and not allow those who are coming behind us to forget. It is our responsibility as leaders to make sure that those who come underneath us do not forget why we say what we say, why we do what we do. You know, I have a saying that just because I say that Black Lives Matter does not mean that I don't believe that Blue Lives Matter. It's not like I have to choose between. I mean, both lives can matter, believe it or not. And so I think that when we get out into the communities and we visit with our communities, Dallas County is a county with 2.6 million people. And we have some 32 cities within our county. And even with having 32 cities in our counties, we have unincorporated areas that our deputies have to patrol. We encourage our deputies to go out there and regardless of what folks look like, go out there to those areas because most of them are underserved communities. Find out what those needs are, reach those communities by addressing those needs. Maybe it means that you point them to a resource, or perhaps it's something special going on in that community that needs some special attention, then we address that need in that community. But I think those kinds of things, when we get out of these walls and we walk out amongst the community, I think we're getting it right there. It's a step in the right direction. And I think if we continue along that route, we will be better for the work.
Thank you. Also, I just want to remind the viewers that are watching that our primary sponsor, the National Law Enforcement Museum and Memorial, is actually taking donations. If you like the programming that you see, go to the chat. There's information about making a donation. We want to keep these types of programs going. We want to keep the conversation going. So if you feel so inclined, please make it a point to go ahead and make a donation. So we're going to go to our questions. And the first question, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but training for a small agency. Now, we have a lot of situations where we call the Karen effect, where white people then call the police on Black people doing normal things. You know, we got Poolside Patty and Barbecue Becky and the woman in Central Park that called the police on the guy that was looking at birds. So here's the question. How do we safely respond to calls for service when the person is doing nothing wrong and is angry and combative when the police are called? We want to train our officers to respond appropriately and create community in service so we can explain our responses. But how do we work together to prevent arrests and misunderstandings in the community? And I'm going rapid fire, whoever wants to jump on that first.
Yeah, I'll respond real quick to that. I think that some of this starts at your dispatch level and ensuring that your dispatchers are also properly trained, because in a lot of those instances with those situations that you had described, there was some sort of a bias that was placed on that dispatcher that then communicated that bias to that officer who's responding, who then made a predetermined notion about how they were going to choose to respond to the incident. So I think that that's where you're looking at some of the different aspects of your bias training and how you actually conduct that. And are you including your dispatchers in that training so that way they are not vicariously pushing a bias onto an officer who then now has it in that mindset. The officer has to be able to make that determination, that discernment when they get there. But I think that's sometimes one of the important aspects that's missing, is that you don't include some of your civilian staff in the training as well. And one of the things that we're currently doing is we're also sending our dispatchers through de-escalation training that's specialized for dispatch, just so that we have that clear understanding of what that expectation should be and how they should be conveying that message.
Chief Findley, how do we police the Karens of the world and convince the people of color that the police are calling on them? How do we build that relationship?
That is a kind of a part two, and you handle the call initially, and then we got to do a follow-up and have more conversation, because as Chief Glover indicated, is that we just got to take the time and really discern that particular call. And so the Karens of the wall, those individuals that may be a little off the rocker, we just got to kind of try to have a normal conversation with them. But it's going to be very difficult at that point in time to reason with them. So we just got to have to do a wraparound and another follow-up with them just to clear the call that particular day. But we got to figure a way to, how do we do a follow-up on that so they can have some understanding? Because you got two polar opposite. You're not gonna make a determination. You're not gonna change their mind at that point in time. Just kind of let them know that it's not a crime, and then I get back with you later. I know I didn't handle that call, but
no. The next question, I'm going to start with Sheriff Brown. The next question comes from Eric. He's a 26-year Black law enforcement officer, and he's asking a real heartfelt question. How can someone get a dialogue started about Black law enforcement among their coworkers, especially with the climate going on in the country right now?
Okay, I think you just have to have the courage to do so. You just have to be the one who's unafraid to step up and initiate that conversation within your agency. Not to say that it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. And let me share a quick story with you. As the only African-American officer at a small agency prior to coming to Dallas County many years ago, I was a sergeant, and I was a young sergeant when the call came out for a suspicious person. And the only thing that could be articulated in the call was that the person, it was a Black guy, and he was in a neighborhood, and the person who was calling hadn't seen that person in their neighborhood. And so they called on this young person. Well, as a young sergeant, I'm trying to make good choices and good decisions, and trying to make good decisions concerning the minority community. And so when the call came out, I had to find the courage within myself, within my law enforcement agency. I'm the new rookie sergeant, but I had to find the courage to say, get on the radio and say, okay, can you have the caller articulate what it is that the person is doing? That's what's suspicious. The activity is what is suspicious, not the person. So please ask the caller, what is the person doing? And before I knew it, that became the norm for our agency on calls that previously would have just been responded to with no questions asked. The caller says, there's a suspicious person in my neighborhood. Why are they suspicious? What are they doing? You have to have the courage, and you have to just start that conversation within your agency. You have to be the one to do it. You can't stand by and wait for somebody else to do it. You have to make the decision to do it. That's why you were placed there. That's why you were called to whatever agency you are working, serving in. That's why you were called there, because it's your turn. It's your time to have the courage to initiate the conversation there at your agency.
All right. The next few questions I'm going to ask kind of in rapid fire. I'll assign it to one person. If somebody else wants to chime in before I move forward, feel free. There's a lot of people asking questions about recruitment. Lori, Darren, several other people are asking, what are the best practices for recruitment and retention of underrepresented people in law enforcement? Chief Glover.
Yeah, so recruitment in law enforcement, that's always going to be difficult, especially in these days and times. So you have to be very creative, and you have to, just try and figure out, the different ways of how you can reach the population and the people that you want to reach in order for them to come into the profession. And there's an onboarding to that. And I'll get into that. But one of the things that we started doing is we started working with a marketing company that was able to, pinpoint, the individuals that we wanted to actually come to the table. So we wanted more females, we wanted more African Americans to come to the table. We started working the whole Google Analytics and being able to, pinpoint who is actually paying attention to Arizona law enforcement. So that way we can try and capture those people and send the recruitment brochures out to them and make sure that, just like when you go on shopping on Amazon and you look for those pair of shoes or Macy's or whatever, and you have that pop up on the side of your screen when you're scrolling through you're on the internet, on the web browser. Well, we want the Tempe Police Department popping up every time that you go scrolling through, looking at something for law enforcement. And so that, we had to try and get a little bit creative in how we approach that. But the other side of that is that retention part. That's tough, especially at this moment in time. And so one of the things that I did, coming into the department is I'm looking at the environment. I had to take a hard look at, the agency that I grew up in, and I'm looking at all the, photos on the walls and everything. And I'm having a Spike Lee moment because I'm like, there's no brothers on the wall. None whatsoever. Because, not until 1979 did we not have our first Black police officer that was hired on, and they had all these historic photos. And so now what we're doing is we're going through and we're trying to make it more inclusive, because the only photos that were on the wall were white people. And that plays a significant psychological, effect on the people that are working there. If you want people to be comfortable and you want to set that tone, that environment, then you have to make those changes. And so having a strong mentorship program and the onboarding of people, making sure that they're getting the training, the mentoring, they're having that go-to person, that's important, as well as their mental health and having a good, strong peer support team. That is another piece too. And if you want to keep people, you got to keep them sane, and that's an important part.
Mr. Williams, no, please go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, on the recruiting, since COVID hit, we was really identifying a lot of HBCUs, and in the South, the southern part of the United States was really targeting the Mississippi, the Louisiana, and part of Georgia, just to go out to those hard-hit areas as well, and just to kind of incentivize anything that we can bring to the table. The retention part is always going to be a challenge with a lot of competing agencies throughout this part of the country. And that's a challenge for us, because a couple dollars or a take-home car or whatever the case may be, a lot of officers will take advantage of that and leave. So it's going to be a challenge, but I like what Chief Glover said, as far as you got to put peer support in everything that you do. You got to show your officers that you love them, and that you got to continue to give them that support, lunch and learn, or whatever you can do to bring to them to the table to have that conversation. And on that last question with Sheriff Brown, I wanted to jump in. She's absolutely right. You got to take the lead. And every 6 weeks, I have a tough conversation with my officers. Whatever you want to talk about, let's have that discussion. If it's Black issues, if it's white issues, whatever those issues are, you got to put yourself in that position to have honest conversation with your folks.
Mr. Williams, you must be facing that at Verizon as well. Are there synergies that policing and law enforcement can borrow from the private sector?
Most certainly. You're speaking about recruiting, right? So we're on the subject of recruitment. So, as I mentioned, and here, the example of middle of a pandemic, my doorbell's ringing. I have no idea who's there. My doorbell never rings. So why would I do that now? Anyway, so from a recruitment perspective, I will just say that we are, again, very much at the HBCUs. We have internship programs that exist. And that program starts around November, at least the process of the internship starts in November. There may still be opportunities though. So if there are ideas or if there are different partnerships for recruitment programs out there that you'd like us to take a look at, please email me. Dr. Boyd, should I give my email address now, or is there a way or mechanism?
Why don't you put it in the chat?
Okay, I will do that. I'll put my email address in there. I have been addressing some requests for public-private partnership points of contacts, one in Arizona and several others. So I'll put my information there. Please reach out. Happy to connect you from a recruitment perspective. I'll certainly make introductions if needed. In addition to that, different public-private partnership programs or that people have put in the chat box there. Happy to make those introductions as well. So I'll indicate my information and happy to step in.
A good place to start is, in fact, with HBCUs. When I was at Fayetteville State University, we were embedded with Fayetteville Police. Chief Hawkins down in Fayetteville doing great work. When I was at UMES, I tried to explain to a lot of the kids from DC and Baltimore that were anti-police that go in, if you don't like what they're doing, go and be part of the change. Be the positive change that you want to make. Yes. So the next question, I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Okay. The next question comes from Brian, and it's a good question. It starts with Pillar 1 from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And as we know, Pillar 1 is building trust and nurturing legitimacy. We know that's the foundational principle in the relationship between the police and the community. But the question is, how do you, as Black officers, Black commanders, Black command staff, how do you navigate the challenges of both internal legitimacy within your department, but also external legitimacy in your community? How'd you address it? How'd you overcome it? Chief Glover?
Yeah, so part of that is that procedural justice piece where you're giving that community a voice, where you also have to give your internal staff a voice as well. They have to be completely on board, and you have to get their buy-in. And the hard thing is sometimes sitting there having those hard conversations, but you have to actually be an active listener. You have to listen to what they have to say as well, because they have, they're going to have their opinions, they're going to have their concerns, but you have to be able to, be that leader and stand up and be able to, have the deep dive, hard conversation with your staff in order to make sure that they understand that they're being supported. But at the same time, it's re-engaging them with that philosophy of customer service and understanding that we are doing this because the community allows for us to do this. They give us the authority to go out there and police our own community. And so that's something that they have to remember. And so once you engage them in that, it sort of starts to take care of itself in terms of them, wrapping their mind around it and understanding it. One of the things that I have recently done here is actually something that I've seen done in many corporations, is created an employee advisory group. We had this public safety task force And, I have a chief's advisory board that's being formed. Well, it was just as important to make sure that the employees had their own advisory board, so that way they can speak directly to me. It's not a situation of, playing the telephone game, by the time it gets to me, information that it's all polished over or whatever, or it never gets to me at all. I want to have direct contact, and they respect that. And I think that's the big thing, is being able to have that open line of communication where they feel comfortable enough to have real dialogue with the chief, and know that hey, you're being supported, and what you say to me is not a situation where you're going to be disciplined or something of that nature because you don't agree with a particular philosophy. We can agree to disagree, but you're still going to do your job.
Chief Findley?
Yeah, Doc, on that too, I think that Chief was spot on. And what I look at is go back to that policy. You got to follow policy. You got to treat your citizens with respect. The police department and my command staff and supervisory staff, they got to do relentless follow-up on those calls that we get, those complaints that we get. We got to investigate them. We got to make a determination of what took place. And again, part of that relentless follow-up is get back and have that conversation with those individuals. And what's important with that first pillar is about trust. And so you got to have that, regardless of that conversation and how hard it is, you got to have that understanding. At the end of the day, we can have a balance and a difference of opinion, but at least they understand where you're coming from, that you're following the guidelines of what we govern constitutionally. And I think that's fine. As long as we have that open conversation and we're listening and we're giving them a professional response, and that we're making those subtle changes that we have to make in those communities and open our hearts and our minds and heart, I think that's a start in the right direction.
We're getting close to the end. Let me throw out a couple of more questions. Dave asks a great question about public relations. Typically, the police are in the news because of use of force. And then whoever the people are, they'll hire attorneys. But the typical response from the police is either no comment or limited comment. We can't talk. There's an investigation going on. But for recruitment purposes, the police don't get their side of the story out there. So how do you deal with that in recruiting? How do you deal with the public relations problem? Chief Glover?
So from a public relations standpoint, we're horrible at telling our own story, let's be honest. I mean, we really could do a much better job, but I think that, that's where, you look at it in face value. We are police, we're not geared towards at times telling our story in a way that, is that's going to be, I guess in a way that really is going to reach out and touch people that the way it needs to. And sometimes I think that's a struggle, and that's, you have to have a very strong relationship, ensure that, you're conveying your message and that you're telling your story, that narrative is coming across correctly. Because you can guide that narrative and the story and tell the story the way that it needs to be told and keep it factual, whether good, bad, or indifferent. But it's the way in how we do it and how we present that. And sometimes it's lacking. And I think that that's something that we're always struggling with, and until you get like really good people in place that manages that, like, we've been, looking at that ourselves, just, how do we improve in that area? And do we go out and we get a company that helps us to do that? Or is it just, better training with our media relations group? I think that's sort of always going to be one of those situations where we're always going to be looking for the proper answer and finding that balance, because at one point in time, I felt that we were really spot on being able to do that, but it's also very easy to shift back and revert back to the no comment and circle the wagons, and we're not really giving the public the information they need.
So Doc, real quick on that, and again, that social media piece, get that first bite of the apple, give them the facts. Don't be afraid to give out that information. And I think that law enforcement for a while has been reluctant. It is what it is. Social media will beat us up. And so you put that piece out and then you talk with the media one-on-one. You just have that discussion. Again, you're not going to give them the whole playbook, but you got to tell them what you're doing based on the factual things that we as law enforcement encounter.
Social media is an asset that we should be using more often. So I'm going to throw out this last question. All four panelists will get a chance to answer this, but I just want to again remind people that are watching, this is brought to us by the National Law Enforcement Museum. So jump into the chat, get the information, feel free to make a donation to the museum, and that'll help us continue these conversations. And a big thank you to my people at Noble that joined in and partnered with this. So the next question, we've talked about diversity and spent a lot of time talking about race and ethnicity. Now I want to jump over to gender diversity because Chris asked a great question, because a lot of studies show that when we increase the amount of females into policing, the use of force reports decrease, the abuse of force reports decrease, and when we control for time on the job and rank, female officers still make the same amount of arrests but have fewer complaints. So, Sheriff Brown, how do we start off by getting more females into law enforcement?
Well, I think that you have examples such as myself and Sheriff Maddox get before our communities and remind our communities that we were once little girls who grew up in a community, and this is where we are now, and that if that's something that we can do, then certainly they can do it too. One of the things that we're doing is we're going to start a track here with one of our local high schools and try to gear folks toward law enforcement. In particular, I mean, we're male and female, but in particular, we're seeking those young ladies who have an interest in law enforcement. I have over 1,300 detention service officers, and the vast majority of those officers are females. They are women. And so we try to put those people out in front of the community so that the community sees that these are females from this very community who are able to do these jobs. And we encourage them. We just want them to be able to do the job. And we want to encourage them that if we can do it, they can do it too. And you're right. You're right. I'm more apt to talk my way out of a situation before I have to get into a hand-to-hand combat with somebody. And we know that to be true across the board. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's great if we can get law enforcement to be inclusive of not only people of color, but gender-wise as well. If you can do the job, we invite you to come on.
Rapid fire answers, 30 seconds or less. Chief Glover, how do we get more females in law enforcement?
I think Sheriff Brown just basically put it out there and explained it and did a great job. I mean, when you look at it in terms of the communication style that females have when they're out there in the field, better job at de-escalating. They naturally do that, and so. We're trying to do is we are always actively trying to recruit for more female officers, partly because of that, and just as we talked about inclusion, and I talked about it earlier in one of the questions, is that inclusiveness, it means that we bring more females to the table because we need their perspective.
Chief Findley, 30 seconds or less. How do we get more females?
Well, we don't have that issue. We just graduated class 18, about 12 of them were females, and we hire a lot of females. And the thing that I will tell you is that we talk about retention, they stay. And so whatever we're doing, maybe it's my good looks, I don't know, whatever we're doing, we got to keep it up because they are good employees. And like Sheriff Brown said earlier, is that they are good talkers and they know how to de-escalate situations a lot quicker than their counterparts. So it's part of that training as well.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, you get the last word on this. How do we recruit more females?
Well, I'll tell you, Verizon places a significant amount of emphasis in this area. We have a program called the Women of the World, in which we are targeting increasing our women in leadership by up to 35% or more. in the next, 3 to 5 years. We started this 7 years ago, and we are well ahead of the goal. So there's a lot of effort there. We believe that obviously how we reflect in the community, both the constituency as well as law enforcement, will help to improve and help obviously the effort that each of the leaders here on this panel have discussed.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, Sheriff Brown, Chief Glover, Chief Findley, Sheriff Maddox. Mr. Williams, thank you so much. Big thanks to President Linda Williams and Dwayne Crawford, and a huge thank you for hosting us. National Law Enforcement Museum, thank you so much. Marcia?
Dr. Boyd, and thank you for ending with that final question, because our next program on March 25th is focused on the positive impact women have on the profession of law enforcement. So ding, ding, ding. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank our esteemed panelists, again, Dr. Boyd and President Williams. We hear you loud and clear. We need to build trust. You have our commitment here at the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum that we will continue to offer programs focused on helping to build trust between communities and law enforcement. Our focus is to keep law enforcement safe and keep names off the memorial wall. Safer communities equals safer law enforcement. We are committed. Once again, we want to thank our sponsor, Target, for making this program possible. Our gratitude goes to each of you participating and watching today. And don't forget to visit us at lawenforcementmemorial.org to make a donation or text programs 2021 at 41444. Thank you so much, everyone, and make it a great day.